out, obviously, but how do you want me to pronounce your name?
Noah Healy,
Noah Healy. Okay, I figured. Just wanted to make sure.
and you're Abdullah.
Abdullah. Yeah. All right. Good evening, folks. Today we've got a unique show for you. It's not involving politics, but instead we'll be chatting about technology and marketplaces. Our guest tonight is Noah Healy. He's a developer and mathematician, as well as an expert on game theory. He's the founder of Coordsic. Did I pronounce that right?
Yeah,
Coordisc. Okay. And it is a startup developing a patent pending approach to creating a commodity exchange marketplace. Noah, welcome to the show.
thanks for having me here, Abdullah.
So first, give our viewers a brief background about yourself.
Uh, well, you said developer mathematician. I've been working on and off for mostly tech startups in the Charlottesville, Virginia area, since that's where I'm actually from, for the last, well, since 2000. And I've been sort of as a personal project, but also as part of professional development, researching computational mathematics and computational logic over the last 23 years.
Okay. And when did you found Coordisc?
Core disk is, let's see, I think it's about 8 years old, or it will be 8 years old this year. As part of research I was doing into communication systems, I found an approach to consensus. Unfortunately, this is of more economic than political utility because politics isn't necessarily about finding consensus about people with a common interest. Politics also includes people getting on the same page when they don't have common interests. And my system requires the common interest, to already be there in order to sort of pay for itself. But in economic circumstances, that's sort of the feature of good trades is that they are in the common interest of both parties.
Yeah. So referencing consensus, you're in relation to economics, you mean consensus in pricing. So you're trying to find a consensus in price between buyers and sellers.
Correct.
Okay. And how does your exchange differ from, or like, your methodology differ from current methodologies? Because, um, there are lots of different, price discovery, formulations, and they all relatively, we can have the same idea. I have a very basic understanding of this. Like we discussed before, I have a technical background, but it's in chemistry, not in this field. So would you just and for the layperson, don't get too complicated. Obviously, it'll be hard for some people to understand. But how does your price discovery method differ from current price discovery methods?
The core of it is that I'm directly measuring and directly rewarding information rather than simply trading actions. So, right now, if you think that prices aren't correct, you can buy or sell. And if you think prices are too low, you should be buying. And if you think they're too high, you should be selling. And as a result of that action, you'll actually influence prices. So you'll actually move prices sort of in the direction you think they ought to go, if you will. If you think they're too low and you buy, then buying drives prices upwards somewhat. And that's where bubbles and crashes, catastrophic crashes and things like that come from. Lots and lots of people all decide that prices are too low at the same time. They all start buying, the price goes up. It wasn't actually true, perhaps, that the price was too low. It was just some sort of mass delusion. But the fact of all those people acting together drove the price up. And as a result of that, you get the bubble. And then everybody realizes that they were in the middle of a mass delusion. They all sell, the price crashes. My system, rather than engaging the price speculator in trade engages them directly in their beliefs about price. And so it works analogously to sort of carnival games where people are guessing how many, clothespins are in a jar, or how much a cow, a mature bull weighs, or something like that. What my system does is it takes on board everyone's opinion about where prices are and where prices are headed, and integrates those into a coherent sort of group opinion, transmits that out, and then lets people effectively re-guess based on their now knowledge of what common knowledge is. And by tracking both what the opinion of price over time is going to be, so not just what people think the price is right now, but what people think the price is going to be each day of next week and month and year, but also the progress of that opinion over time itself. We get a system that extracts the same information, that is what these prices should turn out to be, in a sort of continuous negotiating process, rather than a one-off point-to-point process like existing systems do.
Okay, I see. And people that are, putting their opinion on the price of, a given commodity or product, they're not putting any money on the line. It's just
They are,
they are.
but they're putting money into a posi mutual, which is like a parimutuel, except instead of raking a share off, you're actually shoving a share onto that. So what they're putting their money at risk, but they're taking on a share of the performance of the entire marketplace, and that share will be diminished to the degree that their information turns out to be wrong. So if everyone's leaning, high and you're leaning low, and everyone's right because more or less they have to be, then your money will go to pay somebody to fix your mistakes. But if you're leaning, closer to the right answer than other people are leaning, then you'll be taking a decent sized share of the total market throughput commission.
Okay, I may be perceiving this wrong, but this reminds me a little bit of there's this website called Polymarkets, and it's pretty much a gambling website on certain. So you bet yes or no if a certain commodity goes above or below a certain price, and it just reminds me of that because that's a way of putting your opinion on a commodity and gaining or losing money, but without actually buying the commodity. So you're just gambling on the price of the commodity without actually buying it.
Yes, the big difference is that those are what's known as binary options, and existing
Yeah.
options that are used in the marketplaces are also very similar to that gambling type of thing, and have a little bit more wiggle room in them. But what my system is doing is much more directly valuing the information. So in a system like you're talking about, if there's a bet available of, like, do you think the price is going to get to $1, and you think the price is going to get to $1.50, you you aren't interested in sort of skipping to that $1.50. Like, you would like to make money at the $1 level for as long as possible, and then once everybody wises up to what make money at the dollar and a nickel level for as long as possible. And so you are trying to hide your information from the group. It's sort of a poker game. And what my system does is it flips your incentives on its head. So it sort of turns it into war. If you got the higher card, you're going to win, and there's nothing to be gained by sort of strategically not flipping your card over. So the people are incentivized to tell the truth rather
Hmm.
than attempt to hide whatever it is that they know.
So tell me if this is a good characterization of what you said. So essentially, let's say the price of a stock or commodity is $5 right now, and you believe it's $20. So in that market, like how current markets run, you just be buying a bunch of that stock. So the information you give is that you believe that stock is worth more than $5, but you're not giving the information that you think it's $20. It's not that specific. Is that like what you mean? So in
Yes.
yours, it's going to be like, oh, you if you think it's $20, that information will be relayed to the marketplace.
Exactly. And in fact, what you'll actually do is wait for there to be sort of a lot of busy work going on so that you can put in large orders at $5 without moving the marketplace very much because there's a lot of suckers that just showed up. And so you'll be just sort of waiting around for suckers to show up until finally, everyone finally knows what you know and the price is up so that you can make as much money as possible because you're making money off the difference of the deals you can make. So
Yeah.
if the price gets up to, if you're thinking it's going to 20 and the price is 19.99, you're only making a penny on each one of those deals. You're much better off if you're making those deals when it's like $15 per deal. So you want to sort of hide your information from the rest of the world for as long as possible. But in my system, if you sort of stake your claim out and say it's 20 and it gets there, you will have taken the sort of lion's share of the information of that share of all the trades that happen, not just the ones that you can personally capitalize. Because what you're doing is selling advice to the people that actually need to use this market to trade with one another.
Okay. So just walking me through like a hypothetical scenario where there's a commodity, it's at $5, like we said, the current market price. You believe it's going to be $20. So in your marketplace, what's the action you take?
So you would sort of figure out when you think it's getting to $20, maybe like next month, you know, something weird's going to happen and prices are going to quadruple. So you would tell tell the market operator, hey, I think next month prices are going to quadruple. It's going to be sort of a straight line ramp over the next 30 days, and then for the next year and a half, it's going to be $20 instead of $5, and then it's going to moderate back out. And you'd say, I've got $1,000 to back that up, and so that and other people's opinions would come on board. The operator would integrate your information in and create a set of future prices. And tomorrow, the producers and consumers would see a world where prices were going up pretty quickly and start moderating their businesses accordingly and deciding how much they want to buy and sell. And and then the day after tomorrow, you'd put in your guesses again. You'd have a little bit of return from 1 days of trade, and you could reinvest that. Other people will have seen what's going on, could start moving with the system, and so the if in the scenario you're correct, the world will sort of move to where you think it's supposed to go. You will be on record as sort of having gotten there first, so you'll be getting a nice sized stake out of this, and so your money is getting a very high rate of return, and the buyers and sellers of this commodity get to see a world where they have kind of a safe harbor that's trying to navigate them through this weird set of circumstances that's suddenly changing the price of their entire system.
Okay. So in this hypothetical marketplace, the market price is created by the operator based on the opinions of everyone else. So in a way, it's more centralized because in a regular marketplace, the current market price is just, the lowest uh, sell order and the highest, buy
It's
order.
not really any more centralized because in the existing market there is a market operator and they are communicating that price out. There is a greater degree of batching up. The existing market is about individual deals, and so the market operators are currently posting the individual deals that occur in the marketplace. And the difficulty is that computers have made it sort of so cheap to administer these kinds of systems that there are now dozens of times more deals in the marketplace than there are actual physical transfers. And so the tail is kind of wagging the dog, because 97 to 98% of the activity in the marketplace is middlemen speculators basically trading amongst themselves.
Hmm.
And so what this does is it takes the people with those sorts of expertise and interests and corrals them into a system that offers them actually a better deal. They get higher rates of return, lower ultimate downside risks, less capital requirements to operate. But in exchange for those advantages, they sort of don't get to pick on the weak anymore and try to separate from the herd of traders coming in the most naive or most desperate of the supply and demand traders to try to give really, really bad deals to.
Okay. And you mentioned how, if you had um, information that the price would go up to 20 a few weeks from now and then plateau for a few months. What if you just had a belief that it'd be 20 at a particular point in time a few months from now? Could you also give
You
that?
can, yeah, you can bet a single day.
Yeah,
You could only bet for 13 months from now. If you just have an opinion about Valentine's days, then you could just bet Valentine's days for a decade and a half or something like that. The flexibility of the speculator is vast. They don't have to, if they don't think that people should trade on Fridays, they don't have to ever speculate on Fridays.
yeah. So this, excuse me. So these opinions will be, meddled into the current market price through the market operator. But like for example, let's say on Valentine's Day you think the price will be $20. Is your bet public or is it private and it's only shown through the current market price?
You can do it either way. It's generally speaking better to make it public, and in fact, it's in your interest once your bet's been registered to sort of publicize your reasoning to convince people, because the rate of return for investors is based on the total throughput value of the marketplace. And so the marketplace being surprised or acting irrationally will reduce the amount of economic activity going through it and consequently reduce the revenue that is experienced by the speculators. So if you think you see something that's very, very far outside the mainstream, you want to put it in, but then basically the day after you put it in, you want to say, here's the receipts.
I see.
This
Yeah,
is why I think this, because I want everybody to understand, what's going on, so that we all get on the page, sort of as soon as possible, and steer our way through this, making as much money as we can.
I see. So as you said before, it's the exact opposite of how it currently works, where you're rewarded for keeping your knowledge secret because you want if you think it's going to go up, you want it as low as possible right now. So that's
Right.
interesting.
And that actually gets to, so right now the operator's job is to sort of parse out what people are doing and consequently publish the what the market price is. And they more or less do that pretty well. But because their current incentive structure incentivizes everybody lying, it's very difficult. They have to do a lot of work basically to extract the truth from everybody just trying to bluff some or maybe most of the time. By switching the incentives over to make it so that people are actually rewarded for sort of how much accuracy they can produce, the process of integrating that information becomes much simpler. Although if you don't remember your calculus, it won't sound simpler off right off the top.
Okay, I see. And so you've described a marketplace that you believe is more efficient than current marketplaces and that rewards, being transparent by your knowledge. How are you going to go about generating revenue for your company? Is this company going to license out its patent, or are you going to develop, custom marketplaces for clients?
My plan right now is based around licensing. Um, the licensing model is a little tricky because number one, I'm only pursuing a patent in the United States. It's actually open source overseas. I do have clients that are licensing it, even though it is open source, uh, and we'll see where that goes. But in terms of the patent office has become quite insane at this point. So we still have to see. It's patent pending, and it's heading to court to find out whether it will be patent granted or otherwise. But we'll see what happens with that.
I see. Okay. Could you briefly walk through, the patent process since you have a little bit of experience dealing with the patent office?
Yeah, sure. So basically, you come up with an idea. Um, the first and most important thing is that you can't talk about it. If it's public, it's not patentable. The second and most important thing is that it's patentable. And there's a list of rules for what constitutes things that are and are not patentable. That list of rules is not very well defined, sadly. But you can talk to an attorney and sort of get an opinion on something like that. Once you file the patent, it goes to a patent examiner who takes a look at it and makes a few determinations. One, they decide whether or not they think it's patentable. Two, they decide whether or not they think it exists within the prior art. And three, they decide if they think it's novel and useful. If if they think that it's patentable, doesn't exist in the prior art, and is novel and useful, then they grant you a notice of acceptance. You can then take that acceptance and the version of the patent, and there's just back and forth at sort of every stage. So, extra
Yeah.
verbiage keeps happening. But the version of the patent that they have accepted, the notice of acceptance, pay a fee, hand it to the patent office, and they'll give you back, a certificate with a thing on it, and you've got your patent at that point. Unfortunately for me, I've gotten two notice of acceptance, and I don't have a patent yet. That might be unique in American history. I've been talking extensively not only to my attorney but other patent attorneys and other people who specialize in producing patented IP, and
Hmm.
no one I've ever spoken to out of at this point dozens of these conversations has ever heard of a double notice of acceptance withdrawal.
And that was for the same patent, so you got it. You
It's
got the
yeah.
twice for the same one. Interesting. And did you originally file it with the attorney, or did you go about it by yourself?
I
Because I've
did
heard your,
file. Yeah, I
yeah.
did file with an attorney. So I actually filed a provisional patent. So that's a very simple thing, and with a provisional, the core thing about a patent are the claims, and you want to be very careful about drafting your claims because you can draft a set of claims that will allow you to patent sort of literally anything. Like you could patent a table if you wanted to, if you made the claims restrictive enough, i.e., so restrictive that nobody could ever violate them because tables are in the public domain and normally you wouldn't be able to patent them.
Yeah,
So you want your claims to be broad enough that people can't sort of trivially work around your patent and make it worthless, but they also have to be narrow enough to actually be grantable and meaningful. And having third party help with something like that is very valuable. The problem for me was that since what I'm working on is so esoteric and so specialized, it was hard to find an attorney to work with. So I filed the provisional. That kind of marks your spot on in the line, and then you can talk about it.
I see.
So if it's public before it's patented, can't be patented. If it's public after it's patented, that's fine. So I filed the provisional and then was had a year to sort of find an attorney that I could work with, and that's what I did.
I see. Okay. So after after you file that provisional, it's fine if it's public. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. So that's just in order to, you need to keep the secret until you get the provisional patent and then you work for the actual patent.
Right.
Okay. And I'd imagine, I mean, your company and your technology is very niche. I'd imagine you'd need to work with an attorney that has like some understanding of that industry.
Yeah. So I wound up getting a recommendation from a woman who'd been to Harvard Business School and specifically a group of attorneys that worked with MBAs there. And, you know, one of the things Harvard MBAs specialize in is the financial industry. So they had fairly significant experience in that regard.
Okay. And what have your attorney said about the fact that it's only patent pending and you've had like issues with
They continued to be mystified.
yeah.
They're sort of my primary source on on this being as unprecedented as it is. But they also give me other information. The patent system is in sort of dire straits. There's sort of something of a political hot potato. There's legislative rules that go back to I think it's the 80s. Then there's sort of judicial interpretation of those rules, which have changed at several key points over the last 30-ish years. And then there's the actual patent office regulatory environment, which had a fairly major step forward under Trump, but that while it offered some clarity, still isn't fully clear, and nobody's actually interested in actually fully clarifying what's going on. And the existing case law is essentially continuing to make it murkier and murkier what is and is not patentable.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm actually in my first year of law school and I'm considering being an IP attorney, so it's interesting hearing, from someone that's actually filed a patent. Would you say that the process is the process like deters small, individuals like yourself from filing patents and favors big companies due to the
Oh,
costs?
it absolutely certainly does. One of the things being cited in my appeal to the court is a case that was heard before another court, I think in 2019, from a group that's headed up by this woman who works for the CME Group for a marketplace mechanism, and she heads up a group. She's got like at least half a dozen patents, and basically what they do is they patent marketplace mechanisms. And they've gone to court and gotten a court to say that it's okay to patent marketplace mechanisms. So the patent office saying that my marketplace mechanism can't be patented because it's a marketplace mechanism looks a little ridiculous
Hmm.
when the world's most important financial company has a division that does that and does so fairly regularly. They get, it looks like, multiple patents a year as far as I can tell.
I see. Okay. And do you think there's a particular reason that companies are favored over small individuals, or it's just, because of cost and because of the murkiness of the law?
Well, the cost and marketness of the law is going to be a big piece of it, but there was a there was an attempted at legislative relief not very long ago. I think probably about 5 years ago now. A couple of senators got a bee in their bonnet about this thing and decided, it's our job. We're the legislature. We're supposed to write the laws. Let's get one of these like blue ribbon panel commission-y things together, call in some industry experts, and find out like where the pain points are, what the problems are, and
Yeah.
reading between the lines a little bit and from some of the reporting around that, what it sounds like happened is basically the people that care about the patent system right now are big tech and big pharma, and they have opposite business models. Big Pharma's business model is that they patent everything, they shut everybody out, they get permanent monopolies, and they just juice these things forever. And Big Tech's business model is they just ignore the existence of IP and steal anything that isn't nailed down, and then they take the nails and take everything that is nailed down. And so basically, the big pharma people said, absolutely, the patent system's terrible. It's got to be a lot easier to patent things,
Yeah.
and once you get patents, there have to be much sharper teeth to actually get what you want. And then the big tech people came in and said, absolutely, the patent system's terrible. It's got to be much harder to get patents, and then once you get patents, they have to be worthless. And so the
Hmm.
senators basically said, well, I guess our job is done, and you know,
Yeah.
whatever we do, we're going to piss off half of our donors. It sounds like
Yeah.
doing nothing is the answer.
I get that makes sense too, because I guess with tech companies, they're all, using the same technology. So, I mean, it's common, Samsung and Apple spend millions, suing each other over patents, whereas I guess in the chemistry and pharmaceutical industry, it's only, one company building, a specific, chemical or drug. Um,
Yeah, one of the things that Intel did fairly early on was they created this sort of separate company as sort of a patent clearinghouse, and
hmm,
and they created this thing where you can sign up to be sort of a member of that group. So all of Intel's patents go into that bucket, and anybody who wants to get into the semiconductor game can sign up as a member of that group
and
and
pay
have
a fee.
access. I don't think they really pay much of a fee, but the key
Oh,
thing
okay.
is that in exchange for being a member of that group and having access to all those patents, you have to give that group any patent you develop. And so
Oh,
what that
interesting.
means is that if the two of us start, AN Co to create new super semiconductors thanks to our chemistry programming knowledge. In order to build the semiconductors at all, we would have to join the combo, and so we would have to turn over all of our intellectual property to the combo. And Intel, with their billions of dollars, would be able to beat us to the punch, as it were.
Interesting. Yeah, so my initial reaction to that, concept you just said was, that seems pretty mutually beneficial. You're sharing patents and then you get patents and everyone's able to use, the full technology to develop semiconductors. But with what you said, I guess, the company that has the most resources to actually, I mean, producing semiconductors is very, capital intensive. So I guess it's just a way to like trap people and get all the IP. That's interesting. Another thing that comes to mind is, I guess, Kodak. This is different, but it was just, towards the end of Kodak's life, it's still a company, but it's a shell of its former self. It was producing most of its revenue through just selling its patents and licensing it. So I wonder how beneficial. I mean, that's what the you know people against heavily enforcing patents would argue that companies will just use it to like hinder technological innovation by charging companies a lot of money, and you're just gatekeeping an industry. What do you think of that? It's yeah.
There are very valid arguments against. Frankly, it's incredibly difficult to tell who's actually correct about this thing, and people on all sides of this issue are managing multi-billion-dollar revenue streams, and so there's enormous interest in where things line up. The patent system has been in significantly more ridiculous states than it is right now, and there's pain points that exist because of that. At one point, a certain kind of compression standard was patented, and that's why basically PDFs exist, because that was there was a compression standard that was used for another document format that couldn't be used by anybody else, and so there was a whole thing. It's pretty crazy. My favorite
Hmm.
one, IBM in the 90s actually got a patent on using bathrooms, and it was general enough that if any point during their patent you had ever used a bathroom, you basically violated their patent. And I believe it was 2002 that they released that patent to. It might have been 2003. Now that I think about it, because I was over on the Greenbrier place when I read this. They released that patent to the general public, so they very helpfully decided to allow everyone to use bathrooms without in the United States
Hmm.
without shutting us down.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's when you get into patenting processes, which is a thing that are explicitly patentable under existing patent law, legislatively, and very important process improvement patents exist historically. Um, but when you combine what process means with what we now understand about algorithms and computers, there's some really tortuous edge cases, and it's in some cases similar. Uh, I was working for a biology lab at the local university at one point, and it was shot down, but somebody was apparently attempting to patent some part of like hemoglobin's chemical action, and
Hmm.
effectively one of the big pharma people were attempting to patent breathing, or at least respiration in mammals.
Hmm.
So that's the kind of thing that could have some negative consequences if some one company had access to it.
Yeah, it gets interesting, especially with existing organic materials. You can patent formulation. So you could patent a formula of turmeric with honey and like some other herb, even though those are all natural substances. But those patents aren't very useful anyways because if you patent a particular formula, another competitor could just come out with like a very similar formula and just slightly
Right.
different
Yeah. I
amounts.
added salt to it, and now it's totally new.
Yeah,
And
I've
yeah.
seen that a lot actually in the multivitamin, the supplement industry.
Well, that
So,
that gets to the thing I was talking about earlier, where having some help is very helpful, because figuring out how to craft your fence so that it's big enough that it's useful and small enough that the patent office will actually let you have it is tricky, and it's a lot easier, I think, for as the inventor in particular, you have a point of view that isn't really that helpful for thinking about how big the fence is supposed to be.
yeah, that's very true. Another thing that comes to mind is the idea that if you patent something, it has to be publicized. So there's also the option of not patenting it and keeping it private if the, formula or whatever invention is, complex enough that you believe no one else will be able to, create it if you, as long as you keep it private.
Yeah, WD-40 very famously works this way.
Yeah.
And also, trade secrets are an increasingly popular
I think
form of
Coca-Cola
IP.
is a trade secret, right? Their
Yeah.
flavoring. Yeah.
In my case, a trade secret isn't appropriate because the operator, in my case, actually publishes effectively an internal audit of the system every day. And so the entire system publishes how it works continuously in order to
Mhm.
audit its behavior and make sure that nobody's behaving badly.
Yeah. So it'd be characterized as open source software, would
Um,
it be?
well, so there is open source software under one of the Creative Commons, not the very top tier Creative Commons. It's, I think tier 3 or 4. It's it's out there. But it's the level where the patent will override it inside the United States if they grant it to me. But outside the U.S., that Creative Commons is active, so it could be both an open system and an open source system.
Okay. And could you patent a software that's proprietary, or is that not allowed?
Well, if it's your software, yes.
You can.
However, if you patented somebody else's proprietary software, then that software would exist as prior art. So that could be an issue.
Okay, so to patent something, it doesn't necessarily need to be publicized in its entirety.
To patent something, you have to explain enough about it that a person of ordinary skill in the art, I believe that's the exact legal phrase, can understand what you're getting at. So if you came up with a brand new kind of screw, you wouldn't have to necessarily, you know, produce the exact CAD diagrams of precisely how this thing functions. You could,
Yeah.
people who are machinists understand in general how screws work, and so if you explained it well enough that a typical machinist would have an idea of what you're talking about, that's good enough. And so that sort of transfers to whatever your patent's talking about. So my patent uses the phrase as would be recognized by someone of normal skill in the art all over the place, as
Mhm.
as part of that fencing procedure.
All right. Yeah. And your your software would still be proprietary even if you're patenting it. You said that's allowed, and that's probably how it'd be filed. You're only going to explain it, at a rudimentary level and not provide, pretty much what I'm saying is the source code will not be completely publicized, right? That's not necessary for
So
patent.
public source code exists right now, and my patent actually does even more than that. It it has directives in terms of mathematical equations that code would need to conform to. So
Okay.
it would be possible reading certain claims in my patent to sit down and write code that would perform these functions independently of the code that's already been written and published by somebody of ordinary skill in the art. However, if the patent were granted, using that code inside the United States would be illegal without my approval.
Yeah. Okay. And if you don't mind sharing, like how much have you spent, on the process of filing a patent? I'm just curious as to, how
Tens of
expensive it is.
thousands of dollars.
Oh wow, that's crazy, and it still hasn't been patented. And that just goes to what we were saying, how, the patent system favors, big companies as opposed to individual inventors.
Yeah, well, and also the process that I'm going through with
Hmm.
with having to having to appeal, having to go back, having to re-explain and re-explain, and explain what's going on. Each of those steps, I'm working with a pretty decent attorney's firm, and they're
Mm.
not free.
Yeah. So are most of the expenses to attorneys, or is it to the USPTO and filing fees and whatnot?
Primary expenses are to the attorneys. The filing fees to the USPTO, I think, are in the about $3 to $5,000 at this point.
Oh, okay, so it's mostly attorneys fees. Is
Yeah,
okay. I see. That's unfortunate. I hope your patent gets filed eventually, and best of luck to your company.
yeah, I hope
It's
so. Yeah,
yeah,
it's tricky. So the sort of the drawback of help is that they don't understand it as well as you understand it, and as drafters, they need to understand what's going on, and so
yeah,
particularly with something that's as complicated as this, explaining it takes a lot of time, and that's it's not free. It's not like they're not working for you when you're teaching them what you know. Uh,
yeah. So you're paying them while you're teaching them, essentially, per hour.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
that's pretty funny. What other applications is your, market? Where do you see your marketplace, software patent being used? Obviously, one would be like commodity markets, or markets for like certain bonds or stocks. Is there any other area where price discovery like this could be implemented?
Well, there's lots of other potential applications. I've actually written my patent with an intention not to cover those other applications, so they wouldn't be underneath the patent. But the core mathematics, and this is sort of the reason I didn't do this because I don't really think math should be patented. The core mathematics comes down to negotiations, and so any type of negotiation situation is a potential thing. So business relations in large companies, management labor type things could be run using this kind of continuous integrative negotiation pattern instead. There's project management implications where you could gather information from the workers as well as clients of projects about costs and delivery times as
Hmm.
a discovery mechanism. I just had an interesting conversation yesterday with a woman that is interested in the idea of scientific predictions and management of sort of venture science, if you will, and sort of going after approaches like that. So there's certainly some possibilities in that direction.
Okay, yeah. And my next question was, what's the biggest challenge your company is facing? But I think we figured that out. It's getting that patent of yours. So unless it's not
Actually,
that,
no, that isn't my biggest
oh
challenge.
wow,
My biggest challenge is actually getting people to understand what their problem is. So what my system essentially does is fixes the markets. Right now, the markets are very broken, and people are increasingly waking up to that fact. But there's an enormous amount of inertia around the idea that markets are effectively perfect, and and even for the people that crack, they generally don't think that the markets are underperforming if they're sort of even willing to think that that's possible for the reasons that I see as very clearly the reasons at hand. So from a computer professional, from an information processing point of view, the markets are clearly broken because the algorithm that they use can't scale to where we are. They are effectively signal amplifier noise cancellation devices. So I was just talking to somebody a couple of weeks ago. They're like noise canceling headphones, but noise canceling headphones have a band in which they can operate. And if you put your head on a jackhammer, the noise of the jackhammer is going to come in through your face. Like the noise cancellation isn't
Hmm.
good enough anymore. We now exist in a world where billions of people have access to networked payments. And so the market will ultimately need to be able to scale to the collective opinions of all of us. And not merely our opinions, but our machine augmented opinions, where people who can afford it can afford machines to do strategic operations for themselves faster than eyes can blink. And all of that's currently happening. So, what we've done is vastly increased the amount of noise in the system and done it in a way that the existing market's noise cancellation function doesn't work against. And that's why markets are becoming less and less stable, booming and busting more often. And the actions of, say, the Fed attempting to, control things with interest rates is essentially irrelevant. They're they're like they're patching up a hole in the deck that's not below the water line, and the keel got ripped off. Like it's just totally irrelevant whether or not some water splashes up there and gets their pants wet. Like the entire ship is going down no matter what they do. And so that that's so different and so outside people's recognition. It's very hard to get them to understand what my system even is and why it's incredibly valuable to them.
Okay. This may be a bit of a tangent, but your products in the financial industry. What do you think of, the inflationary based economy that we've been running for the past, 50, 60 years? Or do you adhere to, Austrian economics or, the economics of Milton Friedman who advocated for, slight deflation? Or do you not have like a opinion on that?
So I wouldn't put it at 50 to 60 years. I would put it at more like 3 to 4 centuries.
30 to
And
40 years. Oh, 3 to 4 centuries. Okay, yeah, yeah.
yes, uh, fractional reserve banking for most of human history was regarded as fraud, and not merely fraud, but fraud for which the perpetrator should be tortured to death. That changed right around the dawn of the Industrial Revolution in England.
Hmm.
And the other thing that happened right around then was James Watt invented the steam engine and set off a cycle of an exponentially expanding industrial and economic base. And so, booms and busts aside, over the last few centuries, we've been more or less surviving the existence of our inflationary money supply by having the actual economy increase at the same rate that the money supply was increasing sometimes.
Hmm.
Back in the 70s, it was decided in this country to stop the expansion of the per capita energy production, i.e., to stop economic growth on a per capita basis in the United States of America. And there aren't any other countries that have even attempted to get up to our current per capita energy utilization. So, nobody else is sort of in the league. At the same, and that's to a great extent why so much offshoring wound up happening, because the only way to keep expanding the industrial base was to expand it in other countries because it wasn't legal or physically possible to expand it here
Hmm.
without expanding the grid and energy production generally. There's still a lot of potential economic growth within the space of improving computation, but that economic growth would come at the expense of the salaries and careers of the most successful among us. And at present, we haven't recognized that Fortune 500 CEOs are worthless and should never be paid money and should be replaced by pocket calculators, which actually have some value, like they can count, for example. I don't know if we'll get to there. I mean, that's a big ask, but that's without that. What we're seeing is a situation where we don't have an economy that's actually expanding, and we have a market that actually depends on access to incredibly low cost money and leverage to operate.
Hmm.
And we're also market dependent. Without markets to actually tell us how to manage our food and clothing and shelter production, we will stop being able to manufacture those things in amounts sufficient to keep us alive. So
Yeah.
we're kind of in a bad spot right now, and that's the thing that's absolutely keeping me in the game on
Yeah.
what I'm working on, because there's not much else to work on really. If these problems that I'm looking at don't get fixed, there isn't really anything else worth doing.
Yeah. And it's interesting how you said pretty much, the reason of our growth is because of this, cheap capital, low interest rate environment. Is that what you?
I would say that the reason of our growth is the continually improved engineering of energy production and utilization.
Yeah, a real growth. What I mean is, so would you agree with the idea that, this low interest rate environment creates artificial growth that's not sustainable?
It creates mass inflation, yes,
Yeah.
and we've seen mass inflation. I was talking on another podcast a couple of months ago. One of the things that I've gotten used to over the last several decades is announcements of new record prices for art. Some old
Hmm.
master will go for 20 million or 50 million, or I think what didn't one just go for over 100 million?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. And we think about that, when that gets reported in the public and when people comment on it, the context is essentially, isn't it amazing that our personal aesthetic sense is so much better than past generations' aesthetic senses were. We now understand that this Da Vinci is even more beautiful than anybody in the past 600 years or whatever. But it's inflation. That's what it is. It's
Yeah.
inflation. And it's the first part of inflation. It's the part of inflation that people don't complain about, and we
Hmm.
should. We should have been complaining about it. When Bill Gates bought the Gutenberg Bible for like $1 million and set a record for how much old books were worth.
Yeah.
Everyone should have said, "Oh, wait a minute, there's too much money in the world. If
Yeah.
that's what a Gutenberg Bible is worth now, we need to cut all this crap out."
Yeah. I would agree. So opponents of, our way of, economic thinking would argue that, not argue, but their goal is to increase asset prices as much as possible because they see that as growth. But in my eyes, real GDP growth, GDP is a measure of productivity. It's not just, this number of income. Income is based on productivity, and the only way to increase productivity is either, increase energy production, like you said, or, a technological advancement. So, for example, people, farming with a shovel as opposed to, farming with their hands increases GDP significantly. But even if on paper, if the price of paintings triple, maybe, GDP has increased, but has, productivity increased? I wouldn't
Well,
say so, obviously.
The CCP has a lot of issues with this, and that's where the whole ghost city phenomenon has come from, because they they essentially used these sort of asset price rules as their sort of farm system for the politically ambitious. So if you're some guy with something on the make that's just gotten into the Communist Party, they send you off to be like, vice mayor of, you know, way out there land. And they they've got the property values. They're like, you've got a bunch of undeveloped rice farms, and rice farms are worth $500 an acre. So, good luck with that. And at the end of 5 years or 10 years or whatever your apprenticeship is, whatever the land value difference positive that you've generated is your score. So what do?
Hmm.
Start building 70-story high rises. 70-story high rises are worth a lot more than a rice paddy per acre. There's
Yeah.
nobody in the 70-story high rise. Who cares? 70-story high
Yeah.
rise is still worth more. Well, you know, in sort of a real functioning economy where you're dealing with the actual physics of things, um, if nobody's moving in, it's not worth anything.
Yeah. I mean, that's also the benefit of, a market-based system. That type of development wouldn't occur in the United States. But we're not completely free of that, idea of chasing, numbers on paper. Like as you
Uh,
said, yeah.
we've been very much chasing numbers on paper for more than my entire professional career at this point. And the bill is absolutely coming due. The boomers have started retiring en masse. I just saw a story from somebody else in town where they had heard from somebody that they were getting hired to quickly hire and train 300 people, because this fairly large company was going to have not a mass layoff but a mass retirement, and it
Hmm.
needed to suddenly change out not its least skilled and easiest to replace people, but its most skilled and hardest to replace people.
Yeah.
And somehow this had come as a shock to them. Like, nobody noticed that George was going gray, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's a major issue. And the thing is, the boomers are all the same age, more or less. So they bought into retirement accounts at the same time. And remember what I said at the beginning, you buy, the market goes up. So they all bought in at the same time. They're all going to buy out at the same time, too. So we don't know how much the market went too high, and we don't know how much the market's going to go too low as they're
I
now
haven't,
retiring.
yeah, I haven't thought of that actually. You're just talking about just stocks in general because their investment portfolio and them, liquidating it. I've only thought about the issue of, Social Security, which, is all over the news where there's a big deficit as, this baby boomer generation is retiring. But that
Well,
is a good point.
look at
Yeah.
France's position. Their economy is not in as good a shape as ours, and so Macron basically took a look at it and was like, "Well, we can't really let people retire when we used to be letting people retire. What
Yeah,
if
he
we raise
increased
the
it.
age?"
Yeah.
Well, 2 million people took to the streets, and
Yeah.
and I just saw a story this afternoon. Apparently, the electrical workers union has decided to start parceling out the power grid based on your socioeconomic status. So they're turning off the power to his house
Hmm.
and to other nice people's houses, and they're keeping the power on to the blue collars. Um,
Yeah.
that that smacks of revolution, and that's not a good word in
Yeah.
context of France.
I see that issue as more of a demographic issue as opposed to a marketplace one. It's just that our birth rates have been too low. If our demographic pyramid wasn't shaped the way it is, this issue wouldn't exist.
That's true, and I think that's fair. But at the same time, the function of the marketplace is actually to operate as a super brain, and the
Hmm.
fact that our markets can't actually detect and find these kinds of over time sorts of issues properly is actually a market flaw. And that's actually another market flaw that my system addresses.
Hmm. Yeah, that's true. Um, let's see if we. Do you want to bring up anything else, or you have any points you want to bring up, about your company or about your technology?
Um, I think no, I think we hit some pretty good high points
Yeah,
here.
I think we went on a pretty good tangent about IP law as well and then economics, so I appreciate that. I would ask one thing though, if do you have any advice for, young entrepreneurs or young inventors?
Well, if you're young, you've got the energy. Good for you. Crisis and depression and or whatever aren't great, but they are fertile. So sort of as the dinosaurs die, the small fry have a lot more opportunities. Much has been made that like Apple and Microsoft and some of the other most important companies today were founded in the 70s during one of the worst periods of economic stress in in the last century. And that's also true of the 30s. The Great Depression was very bad for a lot of people and it's awful, but there's a number of highly successful companies that were founded at that time, and because there was a depression on, which made certain things cheaper. So take as much advantage of your advantages as you can, and don't buy into the things that are on the way out, because history doesn't record who the last member of Louis XVI's inner circle was, but I'm
Hmm.
sure he would have preferred not to have joined.
Yeah. All right, Noah, I appreciate having you on the show. Noah's website is coordisc.com, COORDISC.com, if anyone's interested in checking out his website. I tried reading through the white paper. If any of the viewers have a better time understanding it than me, that'd be great. And I also apologize for the mic issue at the start.
Oh,
Appreciate having you.
that's okay. Uh,
Yeah,
and yeah, if anybody wants to check that out, please do. And if you have any questions or want help working through it, you can reach me at noahphealy@yahoo.com. I'm happy to talk about this
no,
stuff.
okay. I'll put that in the description too. All right, good
Great.
night, everyone.